Dying Light 2 looks to have a lot going for it, or at least from what we've seen with the footage, trailers, and all the beautiful concept art. Taking a look back at the first game's art, it looks exactly like the game we got, and in ways heavily improves upon it. In this video, I'm taking an in-depth look at some of the art of Dying Light 2 and giving my opinions on what we could possibly see when the game releases. If you enjoyed this video, like the video and subscribe. Thanks. In some of the art, we see a clear reflection of the faction impact on the world. Each faction is very different, but currently, as we know of, there are two main ones with other wildcard factions around the city. The Peacekeepers seem to be the most powerful. Their view of the world tends to seem more focused on being a more authoritarian force that wants to fully wipe out the zombie threat. Assumingly, this may mean their strictness will play a big role in them being a more villainous faction like Rise's goons in the first Dying Light. But to me, it doesn't really seem clear who the main villains really are. The Scavengers, who rival the Peacekeepers' main purpose is to create a more agricultural approach in the safest way possible, some civilizing on the roofs of the surrounding buildings. According to the lead writer back in 2019, he stated there would be times where you have to side with either the Peacekeepers or the Scavengers. You'll be able to help these factions transform the world into helpful facilities, hopefully for the greater good, but that's your choice to make. One example of siding with either faction the lead writer brings up is a fight over an abandoned swimming pool as seen in this concept art. The militaristic Peacekeepers want to use it to create a training ground because, and I quote, "it's easier to mop up the blood from tiles," while the Scavengers want to use it as more of a greenhouse area where they can produce fuel. I believe each faction will have its own benefits, but for me at least, siding with the Scavengers seems like a more plausible choice. Another example we saw during an E3 presentation is where you have to take sides over who gets a water tower. The impact of that decision could bring in even more friend or foe wildcard factions, one being a radical group known as the Untamed, which according to the game's lead writer can manufacture combat stimulants. Another faction is the Renegades, which you track down the leader of in the demo we've seen in an attempt to turn the water source back on for the people of the city. Once you do that though, you have to face the consequences of an unwanted awakening, the Drowners, a new type of infected. Each faction seems to have its own type of defenses and structures built to hold off against whatever enemies are around. The Scavengers use whatever is left of the city to their advantage, building large wooden fortresses and bridges upon the rooftops. In some photos you can see the use of a lift to get materials up to the top, and it's pretty cool seeing how the survivors use the world around them. The Peacekeepers take a more straight-on approach with less man-made structures built on top of the existing buildings. I'm not too sure what their influence on the city will be, but I'm sure it won't be nice, and at least from what we've seen. This image is one of the more unique pieces of concept art I found. On the right you can see the Peacekeeper takeover of an abandoned library with their blue flag scoping every corner. On the left you can see the influence of I assume many factions and groups, and their different take on the structure. Or maybe there's a base building mechanic to the game, but I kind of doubt that. Dying Light 1 in terms of immersiveness had a lot going for it, but one thing we didn't see a lot of was wildlife. In some of the concept art for Dying Light 2, we see a lot of variety when it comes to the animals in the abandoned European city. Everything from goats, chickens, dogs, rats, to even horses maneuvering the streets. While a lot of these things are subject to change, looking back at Dying Light's concept art, they followed through with their vision pretty perfectly, and in some ways heavily improving on it, like I've said. Hopefully with such a wide variety of animals shown in this concept art, we'll see some infected wildlife in the world as well. Just please no infected birds, I hated those enough in Resident Evil already. The greatest looking aspect about Dying Light 2's concept art is the world itself, and not even in just the concept art, but in gameplay. Nearly every building has multiple accessible floors, with lots of variety and detail. Jumping from skyscraper to skyscraper like The Rock will probably surely never get old, and I'm super excited to see how they approach things, especially with the grappling hook and paraglider and whatever else the game allows us to use. There really is quite a big variety when it comes to the locations, from heavily modified faction fortresses to old burnt down churches. Each of the 7 distinct regions the game's world is made of has its own landmarks and locations, which will eventually make exploration and scavenging worthwhile, I hope. My favorite location being the flooded theme park, which I hope makes it into the final game. Personally, I hope Techland implements more random encounters that can occur throughout your playthrough. Even though Cyberpunk 2077 was a disappointing dumpster fire, the side quests and random encounters really stood out, a lot of them being better than the main story. With as many factions and characters as there will be, let's hope they take advantage of the Dark Age world and humanize it. I want to see and feel the dread and sadness in these characters. Without that, all you're left with is a beautiful but depressing shell of a world. 25% of the game's content will be missed during your first playthrough. This could be parts of the city, missions, characters, and so much more we don't know of yet. I think some of the factions, depending on how you side it throughout the game, will stop you from accessing certain locations and even whole parts of the city. During the gameplay demo released a few years ago with the decision to turn on the water pumps for the city scavengers, that opens a whole new flooded neighborhood to explore, but bringing in a new mutation of infected and a full-scale assault from the Peacekeepers on the Renegades. It looks like we'll be seeing the return of airdrops because in this photo you can see red smoke on the rooftop in the distance, meaning this is probably an airdrop, otherwise I have no clue what else it can be. With how many buildings look very accessible, let's hope there's no more loading screens. It'll definitely make Dying Light 1 feel somewhat old age when we see how open and immersive the world may truly feel. Let's hope the interiors have a lot of differences and all stand out. For the buildings you could explore in the first game, a lot of the interiors looked exactly the same, with maybe an extra fridge or drawer to interact with and make you feel like you're in a completely different room. One interesting thing I love seeing in apocalyptic games is the use of random world objects as a weapon. The things they come up with tend to always surprise me, and that same goes for Dying Light 2. Here we see a bone with cloth wrapped around it, I'm sure to get a better handling grip, which is a thing a few of these weapons also have, like the pipe and piece of marble, which looks like it could have chipped off anything. There's also a piece of metal, a paint scraper, and a gardening shovel, and that's just a little of the large variety we'll see when it comes to their take on modern medieval variations of literally anything. The last thing I want to talk about is our protagonist, Aiden himself. According to multiple articles, everyone in the city is infected with the same zombie virus, and by staying in the light, people can keep from becoming undead. Apparently for Aiden though, this works very differently. He's almost like a Jedi, said the creative director, and goes on to say, if you stay in the darkness for a certain amount of time, it's an opportunity for you. The infection triggers hidden powers that allow him to become more than human. With those powers, players will be able to go places and do things normal humans can't. There seems to be many layers to this that we may not have realized at the time. When it comes to powers, this can really mean anything such as extra damage, a boost jump, or even a beat the zombie like maneuver system. Maybe Aiden could slightly turn into a mutated volatile of sorts for a moment, and this could be treated like Kratos' rage mode in God of War. Let me know your thoughts and theories in the comment sections below. Let's hope we get some answers to something on March 17th regarding what's going on, because I think we really deserve something at this point. Anyways, thanks for listening to what I had to say as always. My name is Ty, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.